You hear the word good before you hear your own name, and at first it sounds like a blessing. In Britain, being called a good woman is supposed to mean safety, respectability, protection from scandal. But in the world you are about to step into, good is not a shield. It is a mask the system forces onto some women while it grinds the rest of them down. Our story begins on a quiet street in a respectable town, somewhere in Britain, sometime between the late Victorian years and the early 20th century, when the empire still liked to boast about civilization while hiding its cruelest experiments behind locked doors. A young woman stands outside a red brick house that smells of coal smoke and lavender polish. She is modestly dressed, gloved hands folded around a small suitcase, eyes lowered in the way she has been taught since childhood. The neighbors think they know her. They know her father is a clerk of unremarkable salary, that her mother never leaves the house without a hat, that their curtains are always drawn at the right hour. They know she goes to church, that she helps with parish teas, that she visits the sick when the vicar's wife asks. They know, in short, that she is a good girl, and that one day she will, God willing, become a good wife to a decent man. That is where the story is supposed to end. But the problem with being a good woman in Britain is that the category is fragile, and the line between good and fallen is thinner than the cloth of her Sunday dress. All it takes to fall on the wrong side is a rumor, a mistake, a pregnancy without a ring, a refusal to obey. The system that holds up women like her as examples is the same system that destroys those who slip or refuse to play along. Inside that red brick house lives such a woman, the sort who is never talked about in polite company, except as a warning. She once stood in exactly the same place, on the same paving stones, holding the same mixture of hope and fear in her chest. She was the daughter who worked hard, who kept her head down, who was praised for her obedience, and then she became inconvenient. Perhaps she fell in love with the wrong man. Perhaps she was assaulted by the right one. Perhaps she simply said no one too many times. The records rarely bother to say. The register will only record that she was admitted to an institution for her own good or for the protection of society or for moral reform. Britain built an entire machinery out of those vague phrases. It called them homes, refugees, hostels, laundries, asylums. Some were run by churches, others by charities, others by the state itself. On paper, they existed to save women. In practice, they sorted them, erased them, and broke them. They offered salvation to the ones who could still be reshaped into somebody's idea of good, and punishment to those who could not. That is the line this story is going to walk. It will follow the women who managed to disappear into respectable marriages, the good women Britain was proud to show off in parish newsletters and charity reports. But it will also follow the women who were hidden in attics, locked in wards, or worked to exhaustion in laundries whose steam never cooled. You will see how the nation patted itself on the back for rescuing the few, while quietly using them as proof that the many who were still inside must somehow deserve their fate. Because if some women could be redeemed, then the ones who remained behind the walls had to be bad, didn't they? That logic allowed everybody else to sleep at night. It allowed neighbors to pass the institutions on the hill and say, at least they are being cared for. It allowed politicians to talk about social purity while ignoring the bruises on the wrists of the women in care. It allowed parents to sign forms they barely understood, trusting that the system knew what was best for their daughters. But the system did not love those daughters. It needed them. It needed their labor, their silence, their bodies as examples. You are about to walk through the door of that red brick house and into the network of homes and institutions that turned human lives into moral lessons. As you do, remember this: the story Britain told about itself depended on hiding the suffering of women who did not fit the script. To understand that story, you have to stand in that doorway and ask a dangerous question. When a society says a woman is good, who gets to decide, and what happens to the ones who are not? The door closes behind her with a soft, decisive click, the sort of sound that never makes it into official reports. The hallway smells of carbolic soap and boiled potatoes, of damp wool and old fear. On the walls hang framed certificates and pious mottos about charity, purity, and redemption. On paper, this is a home for wayward women, a place where they can learn discipline and skills and, if they prove themselves, return to the world as useful members of society. In reality, she is stepping into a factory that processes women's lives. At the end of the corridor, a matron waits, keys heavy at her waist, eyes trained to see not people, but problems to be sorted. She greets the newcomer with the dry smile she has practiced in front of a mirror, just warm enough to reassure donors, just cold enough to remind the women who really holds power here. The young woman has come as a volunteer, or so everyone says, but the contract she signs might as well be a confession. It describes the rules in small, tidy handwriting. Early rising, strict silence during work, no letters sent without approval, no visitors without permission, no friendships that might be considered improper closeness. It warns that failure to obey will result in discipline, that repeated failure will be recorded in the register, that women who show poor character may be detained for longer for their own good. She signs anyway. What else can she do? Respectable girls are expected to serve. Besides, she has been told this work will make her more grateful for her own life. It will show her how fortunate she is not to be like the women who end up here. The first time she enters the laundry, the heat hits her like a physical blow. The room is full of steam, turning the air into a thick, wet blanket that clings to the skin. Rows of women in grey uniforms stand over huge copper vats, their faces shiny with sweat, arms moving in relentless rhythm. The sound of scrubbing, pounding and ringing is almost loud enough to drown out the coughs. This is where the institution earns its keep. Local hotels send their linens here. Wealthy families send their tablecloths, their church surplices, their crisp white shirts. The charity reports boast that the women are being taught valuable skills. What they do not say is that the work is back-breaking, the hours long, and the wages either tiny or non-existent. Many of the women have been here for years. Some arrived pregnant and left without their babies, sent back into service with a new name and a story about having been rescued. Others have been deemed too troublesome to return to the outside world. They are the ones the staff call incorrigible, as if defiance were a disease rather than an understandable response to humiliation. Our young woman is told to supervise, to encourage, to correct. She is expected to repeat the phrases she has heard from sermons and pamphlets. God helps those who help themselves. You can still make something of your life if you submit to discipline. She looks into the eyes of the women bent over the vats and sees something the pamphlets never mention, a hollowing out, a weariness too deep for words. Between the shifts in the laundry, she is taken to the dormitories. The beds are lined up in rows, the blankets thin and grey. Above each bed hangs a small card with a name, or sometimes just a number. In the records, every woman is given a label: respectable girl led astray, servant with bad habits, streetwalker, deaf and simple, low intelligence, moral imbecile. The words are written in the careful, legal script of the clerk, as if they were neutral descriptions rather than sentences that will shape the rest of a life. The staff talk freely in front of her, comfortable in the belief that they are doing good. They boast about the ones who have been successfully placed out into service, the girls who now write back with reports of happy employment, church attendance and clean living. These are Britain's good women in training, the ones the system will proudly claim as proof of its kindness. Photographs of them may end up in annual reports, faces scrubbed and starched, smiles stiff but present. They will marry shopkeepers or tradesmen, join mothers' unions, sit on committees. Nobody at the tea tables will talk about the years they spent in a laundry, but everybody will agree that they turned out well. In the corner, however, there are beds whose occupants are spoken of differently. She will never settle, a staff member says of one woman who flinches every time a door slams. We have done our best, but some of them are simply broken. Another is described as not quite right in the head because she sometimes talks to herself at night, whispering a name the records do not bother to record. For these women, there will be no proud stories in parish magazines, no respectable marriage, no return to ordinary life. The system has no category for them except failure. It is here, in this quiet sorting of futures, that the cruelty of the system hides. Britain does not need to beat these women in the streets. It simply files them into folders marked redeemed and beyond hope, and then behaves as if those labels came from God rather than from the pens of overworked clerks and self-satisfied matrons. Our young volunteer watches as one girl, no older than herself, is summoned to the office. She has done well, they say. She has worked hard, kept to the rules, shown proper repentance for whatever sin brought her here. Time passes in the home the way it always does in controlled places, not in seasons or adventures, but in routines. The bell rings, the women rise, the work begins, the prayers are said, the punishments handed out. Days blur into one another like laundry lists, each line a repetition of the last. Our volunteer learns to move through it all with practiced efficiency. She distributes tasks, notes infractions, praises those who keep their heads down. The matrons approve. You have the right temperament for this work, one tells her. Firm but fair. Not every girl can manage it. The praise feels like a warm hand on her shoulder, steadying her. It also presses her more tightly into the role the system has carved out for her, the good woman who helps to manage the bad ones. At first, she accepts the role without question. It seems better to be holding the clipboard than scrubbing the sheets, but the longer she stays, the more cracks she begins to notice in the story she has been told. One winter evening, a new arrival is brought in, shivering in a thin dress that is completely wrong for the weather. Her hair is hacked short, not in a fashionable style, but as if someone cut it in anger. The intake form says she is 22, though her eyes look older. Under reason for admission, the clerk has written a single phrase: refuse to return to her employer. No further explanation is offered. When our volunteer takes her to the dormitory, the woman asks in a hoarse voice what will happen to her. The volunteer repeats the official line: discipline, work, the chance to be restored. The woman gives a small, bitter laugh. Restored to what? She asks. The house I ran from? The man who locked the door and called it a misunderstanding? The lady who said I should be grateful? The speech is short, but it is more rebellion than the walls have heard in months. Later that night, the woman is punished for insolence, made to scrub floors until her hands bleed. Our volunteer watches, stomach knotted. She knows the rules, knows that complaints about employers are treated as signs of bad character. A good girl is supposed to endure, to keep silent, to protect the reputation of the household. If she leaves abruptly, she is ungrateful. If she protests, she is troublesome. If she refuses to return, she is sent here. The logic forms a trap so tight it creaks. The next time she passes the records room, she lingers. Shelves of ledgers line the walls, their spines labeled with dates and neat initials. Inside, every woman in the home has been reduced to a set of notes: family background, alleged offenses, behavior, outcome. Some entries are stamped with tidy phrases like satisfactory improvement or suitable for service. Others end abruptly with transferred to asylum or absconded. To the administrators, these are statistics. To the women, they are the only official account of their lives. Our volunteer runs a finger down one page and stops at a word she has seen too often: incorrigible. It appears beside the names of women who argued, who cried too loudly, who tried to run, who refused to accept punishments in silence. The word sounds final, like a door slamming. It is how the system justifies giving up on them. If a woman is incorrigible, then nothing more can be done. The responsibility slips cleanly from respectable hands. Britain can continue to call itself compassionate while washing its conscience, along with its linen, in institutions like this. One evening in the laundry, the tension finally breaks. The woman who refused to return to her employer drops a sheet into the grey water and simply stops. Her shoulders sag, her hands hang limp at her sides. The matron shouts at her to continue, but she does not move. The other women glance up, then look down again. They have seen this before. Sometimes it ends with a beating, sometimes with a stint in the isolation cell, sometimes with a transfer to another institution nobody speaks of. Our volunteer steps forward before she has time to think. She is ill, she hears herself say. She needs rest. The words hang in the hot air like a dangerous spark. The matron's eyes narrow. She needs discipline, comes the reply. If we make exceptions for one, we will have chaos. You are here to help us, not to undermine us. For a moment, the room is filled with the sound of water dripping from the abandoned sheet. The volunteer feels every pair of eyes on her, weighing whether she will retreat. She thinks of the sermons about mercy. She thinks of the line on the intake form, refuse to return to her employer. She thinks of the way the woman flinched when a door slammed. Please, she says, quieter now. Just an hour. I will take responsibility. The matron's lips press into a thin line. The request is granted, but not forgotten. That night, the volunteer's name appears in a different ledger, the one the staff keep about staff. A note is added beside it. Shows undue sympathy. Watch for softness. The word softness is underlined. It is subtle, but it marks the beginning of a shift. From that point on, every decision she makes is judged not only by its accordance with the rules, but by the suspicion that she might be starting to side with the women rather than with the institution. Years later, when most of the ledgers have been boxed up and forgotten, when the home has changed its name or closed its doors, someone will open an archive file and try to understand what happened inside places like this. They will find statistics about rehabilitation, tables showing how many women were successfully restored to family life or service. They will read glowing reports about the good women who came through these doors and left, supposedly grateful to live decent lives. Those reports will speak in the careful language of social work and morality, praising discipline, order, and Christian charity. They will almost never mention the women who did not leave, except as footnotes. Our volunteer will be missing from most of those documents. If she leaves the home and returns to ordinary life, it will be in the way women's stories usually end in official records: a change of address, a married name, a note about children. Somewhere, in an unremarkable town, she may become exactly what she was meant to be from the start: a respectable wife who attends church and manages a household. People will call her a good woman, and they will mean it. They will never know how close she came to falling out of that category. They will not know about the night she lay awake in the dormitory, listening to the muffled sobs of the women around her, and wondering how a country that called itself civilized could accept such suffering as the price of order. They will not know that for years afterwards she will see steam rising from an ordinary wash tub and feel, for a moment, as if she cannot breathe. The women who were kept inside will be even harder to trace. Some will die in the institution and be buried in unmarked graves, their names written only in registers that nobody outside staff ever saw. Others will be transferred to asylums, their previous histories quietly erased under new diagnoses. A few will manage to run, their lives fragmenting into small, undocumented acts of survival. Their stories will live on, if at all, in rumors passed down through families. The aunt who went away for a time, the grandmother who never spoke about her youth, the cousin who disappeared from photographs. Britain will move on. Wars will come and go. The welfare state will grow. New laws will be written about mental health, about child protection, about social care. People will say that the old days of harsh institutions are over, that such things could not happen again. And yet, beneath the new language and new buildings, some of the same patterns will continue. Women will still be judged on their usefulness, their respectability, their willingness to fit into roles designed without their consent. Those who conform will still be held up as examples. Those who cannot or will not will still be punished, often in ways that leave little trace on official paper. When we talk about good women in British history, we are usually repeating the categories the system itself invented. We picture the dutiful daughter, the loyal wife, the tireless mother, the selfless nurse. We rarely ask who had the power to define goodness and at whose expense those definitions were enforced. The institutions for women that dotted Britain's landscape in the 19th and 20th centuries were not accidents. They were the physical expression of an idea that the nation had the right to shape women's lives for them in the name of morality, order, and public safety. They provided convenient answers to awkward questions. What should happen to a maid who accuses her employer of assault? She must be hysterical, or ungrateful, or immoral. Send her to a home. What should happen to a young woman who becomes pregnant without a husband? Clearly she is irresponsible. Send her to a home. What should happen to a widow who drinks to numb her grief? A girl who refuses the marriage arranged for her? A wife who runs from a violent household? In each case, the same solution. Send her to a home and let the institution decide whether she can be made good again. The public saw only the surface. They saw the charity bazaars raising funds, the photographs of neatly dressed girls learning sewing or mending, the testimonials from a handful of former inmates who, under pressure or genuine relief, spoke about having been rescued. They did not see the women whose backs ached from endless unpaid labor, whose children were taken from them as a condition of their reform, whose letters were censored or destroyed. They did not see the way the threat of being sent to a home hung over every girl like a shadow, disciplining her long before any matron had to lift a finger. That is the secret at the heart of the story.